Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone, all the South Africans, and good morning to our international guests. I'm so happy to see so many of my friends and of the names that I was hoping to see here, and still hoping more will join. I know Christine Zips she has a very busy schedule waiting for her, and I just want to thank Christine because she's giving us her platform. And I just would like to say, Christine, thank you so much. Christine Zips, everyone. She is an independent health rights advocate and founder of Zips Media and co-founder of Wired Schools. And I was recently lucky enough to participate in an interview that she interviewed author Tom Kirsting, and I'm very excited to see that interview soon. So Christine's very big thank you to you for your kind and generous offer.
Thank you, Carla. It's the least I could do to provide a stage for your wonderful event today. And I would just like to thank first, Cece, for all of the work that you're doing to gather all of this together. And Cece, you're just such an inspiration to me with my work, and how wonderful that you're going to be guest presenting today. And everyone here involved, I'm sure we're in such a busy season right now. There's so many things going on, but I really admire each and every one of you for being here and caring about our children. So thank you so very much. And if you'd like to see some additional information, you might come visit at YouTube. My channel is Zips Media. We have lots of videos. Best of Wired Schools might be the most appropriate related one. If you have a chance to go there, I'd love to see you there. So with that, I will step away and thank you all again very much for letting me be here today. Bye for now.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you,
Thank you very much. And then I'm honored to introduce Cece Duchette, who has been absolutely amazing and so supportive. And I have huge admiration for Cece. Cece is a technical and professional writer by trade. She is the Educational Service Director for the International Nonprofit Wireless Education and the Director for Massachusetts for Safe Technology. She helped her schools in the United States to become the first to take precautions with wireless safe technology. And she has also worked to bring legislation for safe technology. Cece, thank you so much. I really admire you. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Carla. It has been an honor to support you in the courageous work that you've been doing with your school at Bishops in South Africa. I know it's really hard on our schools when the first person brings this issue to their attention, and it can be very, very difficult. So I admire your courage, I admire your persistence, and mostly I admire your parenting for looking out for your child and doing everything within your reach that you can, not only to protect your son, but all the other children at Bishops and the staff, because this radiation affects us all. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cece. Thank you.
Betcha. So what I'd like to do is I will go to screen sharing option, and I prepared a PowerPoint presentation. Can everybody see that okay? Yeah?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for confirming, Lindsay. Nice to see you. All right, so what we'll go through today is this presentation, and anywhere you see an underline, that means there's a link, and through that link you can drill down to any of the information that we're speaking about today and actually look at the facts. You know, we don't want you to just take our word on any of this. We want you to do the deep dive if that's in your nature. If you just want to get down to the bottom line, how do I protect myself and perhaps my family, we'll give you that too. I'll give you a bit of background about how I got involved. We'll look at the science, and we'll also look at the fine print that comes with all of our devices. And then we'll talk about solutions. What does safe technology look like? And then what is our goal, and what choices do we have as we look to make a transition to safe technology? And then we'll open it up for the question and answer session. And what I will ask is that as you come up with questions throughout the presentation, please go ahead and put them in the chat. And then at the end, Carla will moderate the chat and we'll answer questions, and we may have other experts who are joining us today who could answer questions with us too. So,
Cece, sorry to
yes.
interrupt. I'm trying to, Dr. George Carlo is trying to...
I clicked him. I already admitted him.
Okay.
Welcome, Dr. Carlo. Nice to have you with us.
Hey, thanks a lot. Nice to be here.
All right. For those of you who may have watched the film Generation Zapped, Dr. George Carlo was pivotal in his early work on wireless radiation with government studies. So he is one of the world's foremost experts on this topic, and we'll be so honored to have him if he can stick around for questions and answers. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Carlo. Okay, so I was just a tech writer. I was the mom of 2 children, and in our school district, we kept hearing about the 21st century classroom and how our kids were going to need all this great new technology to succeed in the world. And so we just jumped in to help. Our school budgets, this was a public school system, and we had been cut to the bone for years. And so as parents, we were doing fundraising to get wireless technology in, to get the iPads and the Chromebooks and the smart boards and the Apple TV and the minis and what we thought was this great new technology. And then one night at book group, a girlfriend of mine who's an electrical engineer tipped us off that there could be something up biologically with wireless. So as a tech writer, I do research into whatever I'm writing. And so I just started poking around to see what this issue was. And I got in way over my head. There was far more information available than I could keep track of. So I just created a very simple repository for my findings, and I called it Understanding EMFs. And we won't get too terribly technical, but electromagnetic fields are what EMFs are. And these are these pulses of radio frequency microwave radiation that pulse at billions of cycles a second from our wireless devices and from the infrastructure in the small cells as well as the big cell towers. And as we can see on this little chart of the electromagnetic spectrum, we're talking about microwave radiation. Oh, sorry about that. I forgot to unplug that one. So this is microwave radiation, and it is in the scientific literature, there's no safe level of microwave radiation identified. So we want to be very clear on that, because as we look at the science, we're still investigating what the biological effects are, but there physically are no safe levels. So that's important for understanding. So what does the science actually tell us? In the long term, we have studies that show infertility. We have studies that show DNA damage, which is the roadmap to grow a proper little human or any other cellular structure. We have child and adult cancers, and we have neurotoxicity, which, you know, when we poison our brain, we have a lot of really, really unfortunate things happening, like ADD and ADHD and autism and Alzheimer's. And this is all linked up in the scientific literature. So when we look at these graphics over here on the right, the one in the middle is here in the United States. The US National Toxicology Program worked on a study for almost 20 years. And they started it back when cell phones were the technology of the day. And their question was, can there be harm from cell phones? And so they spent years doing the study, years doing the analysis, and at the end of the day, after an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health, they determined in their final report clear evidence of cancerous tumors, as well as DNA damage and some other harm. And the industry will spin it that, that's only one study. Well, right on the heels of our big study, and this is one of the world's leading toxics researchers stating clear evidence of harm. Right on the heels of our big study, Italy's Ramazzini Institute completed another large study, and that's what this one is up here. And that corroborated everything we found here in the United States. So the industry at every turn will try and play down the harm so they can continue to market their toxic products. And what is really applicable to our talk here today, because it stemmed out of the work that Carla did with bishops, is that children are especially vulnerable. They are not just little people. And if we look at this graphic on the bottom, the images that you see up top is like if you were holding a cell phone to the head, they just tilted it to fit on there. But on the far right, you see that when an adult puts a cell phone up to their skull, it's penetrating the brain about a third of the way through. When a 10-year-old puts that cell phone up to the head, it's going about 2/3 of the way through. And when a small child, like a 5-year-old, puts that cell phone up to their head, it's permeating almost their entire brain. And their skulls are still forming, so they don't have as much of a bone barrier as you and I might, and it's not good for you and I. And their brain has a higher water content, so that the radiation is more active inside of a child's brain. And so this applies to every device, not just cell phones. It's the tablets, it's the wearables, it's the baby monitors, it's the gaming devices, it's the router. Anything that's transmitting signal and data back and forth using wireless is using toxic microwave radiation. In the short term, I think some of you may recognize symptoms in yourself or perhaps your loved ones of microwave sicknesses. And here in the United States, sometimes they're referred to as electrical sensitivities because our government already recognizes them, and that's what they call them. So our Americans with Disabilities Act already recognizes electrical sensitivities. And I love this chart that was put out by Daphne Tachover at We Are the Evidence. When you look at what this is doing, insomnia is a huge one. So many people don't sleep through the night anymore. And the reason for that is that this microwave radiation is pulsating all night long, billions of cycles a second. And as part of our circadian rhythm, we're meant to have darkness. And this light energy form is going all night long. So our brain thinks the lights are on basically, and it doesn't properly release melatonin, which would then go in and regulate our sleep and help do cleanup of the toxins from our bodies throughout the day. So when we remove these exposures though, a lot of people come back and say, and I didn't want to believe this, I didn't even want to think about it, but I really haven't been sleeping well. So they take a chance and they turn all their wireless off at night, and they come back time and again and say, oh my gosh, I slept for the first time in years. So big gains for a little bit of education here. These stabbing, searing headaches, often migraines, nosebleeds and ear bleeds. We also see this chronic fatigue because our poor bodies are just getting zapped with this stuff day and night. And then pain, a lot of people are getting pain that their doctors can't seem to target where it's coming from. Skin abnormalities, sometimes people feel heating when they put the cell phone up to their heads. Sometimes they get rashes. Sometimes their nerves start going jiggity on their leg where their cell phone might be carried. So heating, flushing, rashes, nerve abnormalities. And then the heartbeat might go too fast or too slow. And then cognitive impairment. You know, this is doing a number on how our brain operates for both children, adults, and our senior citizens as well. And then we have these neurological things happening with these anger outbursts, these behavior issues where children are behaving in ways that they can't even account for. I don't know why I just did that. I don't like the way I feel. I don't know why I'm behaving this way. And their poor little central nervous system is getting jacked by this radiation day and night, unless we, as the adults, learn about this and take measures to protect our children. And then this whole epidemic we have today in our industrialized nations with anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, we have never seen children hospitalized at the rates that they're being hospitalized today for these clinical breakdowns on their central nervous system. So this article over here by Dr. Martin Paul talks about this widespread neuropsychiatric issue that we're facing, including the depression and so on. So if you want to go look at a study, that one is available to look at too. And again, anywhere we've got links in here, you can drill down and get to much more information on this. So in addition to thinking about you and I and our families, we also need to say, well, if this affects every single living biological cell, what is it doing to our poor planet and all of our pollinators, all of our bees, the trees? So we see our bee colony collapse. We know that the neonicotinoids definitely play a part with those harsh chemicals, but we also have study after study showing that this is dysregulating the natural navigation system that our pollinators have with the earth. They have magnetite, or like a magnet that's meant to be synced up to the electromagnetic field of the earth. And now that we've introduced this whole layer of electrosmog, they oftentimes can't find their way back to the hives or back to where they need to go. And now with this 5G technology, we're using a different waveform, and that waveform is about the same size as our poor little pollinators. So they don't stand much of a chance unless we get ahead of this. And then the birds, they are just as critical to our world and our source. They scatter their seeds in their fecal matter that help to make our planet grow properly, make our food grow properly. And when they did 5G testing in The Hague in the Netherlands, literally hundreds of birds dropped dead from the sky. We're getting the same reports out on the cruise ships that have put 5G in, that the birds come around to the ship and then they just get zapped by this radiation and they start falling onto the decks. We got reports out of, the Southwest here in the United States recently that this was happening too. So another thing is that, we've never been given information to really think about it, but every single one of our wireless devices has a whole lot of mineral components in it. And the humanitarian toll that this is taking, all the horrors of forcing people to do mining down in the Congo and elsewhere, and taking the water in a community to wash the minerals when the families themselves don't even have enough water. So this is kind of the shadowy side of this that we're just simply not given information on. And then there's the energy consumption. For those concerned with climate change, even our engineering resources are telling us that the wireless technology consumes 10 times more energy than safe hardwired connections. And that's through everything that's run through our data warehouses, all of the wireless networks, and then part of it is also what we can take accountability for our own personal devices. Streaming uses huge amounts of energy. Every time we send and receive a cute little, emoji or whatever, somewhere that's using energy to send and receive. Every time we charge and recharge, we're using energy. And then if we don't know any better, we're encouraged to download all these applications onto our devices. And honestly, we don't really even use most of them. There's a few that we use, but if we don't know any better, those stay on and they continuously do updates in the background that draw further energy from our world. So yeah, once I learned all this, it was when I read the sperm studies, the infertility studies, that I actually said, you know what? I got to tell somebody about this, because they've taken male human sperm, they exposed it to a laptop with the antennas turned on, and it changed the DNA, it slowed the motility, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable in just 4 hours of exposure. And when I'm reading this science, I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. And our youngest daughter had just gone off to high school that year, and we had gotten her a laptop, which of course, where is she using? But right on top of her reproductive organs. And so I think that was the day I found my voice. So I started the conversation with my schools, and I started sending them the science that I was finding, that the French National Library removed Wi-Fi in 2008 because of the biological risks. And I got back crickets, nothing. And I volunteered in my kids' schools for 20 years. It wasn't like they didn't know who I was. I was actually working for the schools as our grant coordinator. And I, I found out about something called Donors Choose here in the United States that does crowdfunding for teachers. And I thought, well, wouldn't that be great? We can, our budgets are really decimated. I can go after these grants and teach our teachers to get these grants. So I did, and we got more than 100 projects funded to bring in Chromebooks and, iPads and all this stuff. So personally, I felt responsible for trying to find a solution. And so I just kept sharing. I just kept giving them information. And they eventually formed a subcommittee with our curriculum director, with our technology director, with a member of our school committee. And by then, I had invested to buy a radio frequency detection meter. And because this is one of those invisible toxins, I thought I might take a moment to do a little bit of a demonstration. And if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it's that we need to be really aware of invisible things that can hurt our bodies and our brains. So in my home, I figured this out, and it took me a while, and I circled my tail. But right now, we choose hardwired technology, and I'll walk you through what that means in a little bit. But here in my home, when I turn on this radio frequency detection meter, and this one is called an acoustimeter because we can actually hear the sound, right? And if there were no radio frequencies anywhere near me, I wouldn't even see this little green light here. But because there are cell towers somewhere, because we do have a couple of utility meters that I'm hoping I can get resolved so they're not pulsing radiation at my family day and night, I do still have a little bit of exposure. But I wanted to show you what happens when I turn my cell phone into active mode. For myself, the choices that I've made is I keep it in airplane mode, and I only turn it on when I need to do something. I don't just leave it sitting around. But look what happens. So I'll turn this off again because I don't want to be sitting here in this exposure. But the reason why it was jumping around like that, remember we talked about this being a pulsed, spiked, erratic peak of radiation? That's what this radiation detection meter tells us. So we know how to measure this. We can see it. Carla asked bishops to come in and measure, and they did do some measurements. They didn't use all of the equipment they had at their disposal, but it definitely showed there's a very high level of toxic microwave radiation in that school. And we're not singling out bishops. This is now in just about every single school in our developed nations right now. But now we're joining the conversation at a really wonderful point in time because we do have a lot of really good information and tools to teach us how to get to safe technology. So my schools became the first in the United States to take precautions, and that's how we got this little sign, that tells us to turn off these devices for starters when we're not even using them, and then only turn it on when you need it. Always place the mobile device on a solid surface, and again, you don't want it on your body, and then keep as much distance as you can. So we have this, you're welcome to take that and share it with your own schools. But I think what happened in my schools is when they read the legal fine print that comes with all of our devices, I think that's where they had a major uh-oh moment, like, uh-oh, we could have legal liability here. So for anybody with us today who has an iPhone, I would invite you to take it out at this point in the presentation and go into settings, and then I'll walk you through so you can see where the fine print is. And for those who don't have an Apple device, this is in the fine print of everybody's device. You can just go out online and type in your manufacturer and your model and just put in RF for radio frequency, RF exposure, and you can see what yours says too. But for those who have an iPhone, or the Environmental Health Trust put up this page called See the Fine Print, and you can go read what some of these fine print disclaimers have said over the years. So from settings, you just scroll down a little bit and hit general. On an older iPhone, you would then go to the top and hit about, but most people have upgraded now. So from general, you would just go all the way down to legal and regulatory, which is usually about the second from the bottom. And you hit legal and regulatory, and then there's a little list, and about 5 or 6 down, you'll see RF exposure. And that's our radio frequency, microwave radiation that they politely call energy in that legal fine print. And so when we read that, it tells us a couple of really important things. One, they tested this device at a distance. They didn't put it right up to our heads, right, or our bodies. When we do that, the science shows that we are exceeding our government guidelines by 4 times, 11 times, you know, in different settings. And it also says to use a hands-free option, because by simply holding your one device the way that we've been given it, you're getting radiation now from 5 or 6 separate antennas. In that one single device, we have a cell antenna, a data antenna, a Bluetooth antenna, a Wi-Fi antenna, a locator antenna, and a hotspot antenna. So you might have 6 antennas in there, and if you're upgrading to 5G, you may have a whole lot more in there. So don't buy the 5G. We'll get into that in a second, but don't upgrade to 5G. So that's been in there all along. And the industry can say, well, hey, we told you. It was right there. So what we need to do is get this education out there. And look at this over here, the Apple iPads, seizures, blackouts, eye strain. There was a little 7th grade girl here in one of the towns near me who had a seizure holding the iPad, never had seizures in her life, right? And that wellness teacher got on it, and she started developing curriculum to teach her kids to use technology safely. So I really applaud those who step up and take some action. So as I was learning more and more about the science, I kept thinking, you know what, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. And it wasn't, you know, I fell down the rabbit hole with this in like 2012, and it wasn't until 2015 that Harvard's Law School Center for Ethics, Harvard University, they came up with this 59-page report on the top here called Captured Agency, How the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. And it talks us through how we've gotten into the situation where it's a revolving door at our federal agencies. They are getting industry people to lead those agencies, and then nobody's left looking out for the public. And I mentioned a while back that we did that $30 million study that showed clear evidence of cancer here at the National Toxicology Program. And the FCC was asked by our government to look at this and see if their radiation exposure levels need to be revisited. And even after that big study showed clear evidence of cancer, the group that sponsored that study was our Food and Drug Administration. You know, it started 20 years ago. Now we've got somebody else at the head of that. Well, this Dr. Jeffrey Shuren turned around to the FCC and said, keep doing what you're doing. It's fine. After his own department study showed clear evidence of cancer and DNA damage. So one might ask, what would ever possess Dr. Shuren to do that? And then we find out his wife is a partner in a law firm that represents the industry to the tune of billions of dollars. So he should have never been anywhere near that study. But this seems to be the way that our governments are going these days. And it's not just here in the United States. In Europe, the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, or ICNIRP, they have huge conflicts of interest as well. Most of the folks there come from industry and are funded by industry. So the Environmental Health Trust has a lot of great information out on their website, and that link will take you there. So when I realized that there is nobody at the federal level looking out for us and our children, that's when I really, became determined that we've got to do something, because these impacts are cumulative. So the longer we expose ourselves, the sicker our society is going to become. And so now we have, as if all that weren't bad enough, but hang in there, we're going to get to some good stuff too. But I do want to give an overview of what 5G is. So 5G simply means fifth generation technology. And because it's fifth generation, it comes after fourth and third and second and first. People might think, no big deal, you know, but it's a whole different technology. The industry is spinning it up that we're going to have faster streaming, faster entertainment downloads, smart cities, super highways. But notice what the industry is doing. They're actually buying the entertainment companies so that they can proffer another revenue stream off of all of this downloaded content. But 5G won't work by itself. It still needs the infrastructure of the big cell towers and antennas that we have today, because that provides the backbone to make 5G work. And the waves that are used to carry our current signals with 3G and 4G, they're long, and they can manage to get into buildings and through, you know, objects and stuff. But what's left of the electromagnetic spectrum are these crummy little millimeter waves. And so the industry is spinning it up that they're going to use those for all this great new speed and stuff. But these little millimeter waves, they can't go very far, nor can they go through objects. So we have situations where they come in and start putting up these small cell antennas. And in order for the signals to get through, they start lopping off the trees or removing the trees entirely. So it's really bad for our communities, really bad for our environment, and really bad for us. So the industry's goal, because these signals don't go very far, they want to put millions of these small cell antennas at the curb right outside your house and mine, literally like every 2 to 12 houses. So if you look at this little map on the bottom, all those polka dots are one district in Boston where they've already penetrated. And every dot and every different color is a different vendor that goes in and puts up their toxic technology. I've had a woman contact me in Boston and say, I can't even sleep in my bedroom anymore. One of these small cells showed up outside my bedroom and my whole body is going jiggity. So this is happening in real town. And unfortunately in Cape Town, you guys also have 5G already installed. So this is happening now. So we need to figure out what it is. And in typical fashion, these companies come in and of course it's a business. So they want to maximize their profits. So they go where the most people are, where we have densely populated areas. They roll out their toxic technology. They promise they're going to get everybody excellent access. And we still have people out in the rural areas who don't have good high speed at all. So their next step to reach these remote areas is to hang satellites from the sky that will beam this radiation all the time. They're going to have antennas that are constantly searching for these connections, and then they'll have this beam forming technology with 5G. So yeah, this is happening in real time. Our governments are already licensing the spectrum to go ahead and start hanging these satellites from the sky. So it's going to be really hard to escape this unless we do something about it. And the kicker is, we had a congressional hearing here at the United States, and one of our federal senators was speaking to the industry and said, so please share with us, how much money have you invested in independent research to make sure this technology is safe before it comes to market? And both of these technology industry leaders kind of went, well, actually, you know, we don't know about any science to prove that it's safe. So the senator said, well, we're pretty much flying blind here then, aren't we, as far as health and safety is concerned? So it's just incredible that they've been able to push this toxic technology in, but it's like big tobacco, right? And now we're getting reports out of the technology world that 5G isn't even living up to the high speed promises that we've been given. They're calling 5G a bad joke. So this is a great time to join the conversation on how do we fix this. And civil rights leader here in the United States, one of our greatest was Martin Luther King Jr. And he teaches us that anytime we need to make a meaningful change in society, to change that social norm, it comes through 3 channels. One, the public engages, and that's what we're doing today, is just trying to help people understand what this issue is, because as we see in that captured agency report, our mainstream media is captured as well, because they can't do true independent journalism because their networks are either outright owned now by the industry. We used to have like 50 independent mainstream media outlets, and now they've all been bought up, and we've got what, maybe 4, maybe 6 that are pretty much owned by these big corporations, or their advertising revenue is such that the networks won't bite the hands that feed them. So we as a public don't get the information. So now it's time for us to look at all this great information that's out there. And then, as Carla did, as I've done, as others on this call are doing, you got to speak up, because nobody's going to fix this for you. So public engagement's the first channel. Secondly, the courts make rulings that begin to protect the public. And third, we get public policy caught up to the science. And so I'd like to give you some examples of how these are playing out right now. Here, where I am in Massachusetts, the city of Boston filed a formal comment with the FCC saying, we don't trust those radiation exposure guidelines. A town here in Burlington, Massachusetts came up with a policy that had the industry withdrawing their small cell applications, because they said, you can't just drop and run with this equipment. You've got to come back every year and recertify that it's still viable in our community. And you have to pay us to hire an independent consultant to make sure this is done on the up and up. And so when the Verizon lawyer heard that, he said, well, my client doesn't want to set precedent for either an annual review or an annual fee, because mind you, they're planning to put millions of these everywhere, and that would cut into their profits greatly. So there are others who have been making inroads, and there's a wonderful environmental education group that has a project called 5gcrisis.com, and they're culling the best practices. And they've come up with an ordinance that here in the United States, many are taking to take to their towns, to talk to their town leaders and their town lawyers and say, we need to get something codified in the law to protect our citizens. So there's great resources here for everybody. And then there's a town here in Massachusetts where the citizens learned, they brought the issue to their town, and they managed to get a 1,500-foot setback, which I think is about 500 meters. So you can't put a cell tower within that distance from somebody's home, and they actually got 3,000 feet or double that in their bylaw to protect our schools. So you can't put a cell tower up at a school, right? And then here in Connecticut, in the town of Easton, there was a grandmother who figured out what 5G and wireless is, and she worked with her town and they got it banned. In Hawaii County, they got a resolution saying, we don't want 5G. That is not a legal ground to stand on, but it was a wonderful opportunity to educate many, many, many people in Hawaii. And Bermuda has put a temporary moratorium on 5G. And if you look at this link here, you'll see there are actions happening all over the world. So the wheels are sort of coming off the proverbial bus for the wireless industry. And here we had a hearing with our Department of Public Utilities last month. And as we were preparing to say that we don't want utility smart meters on our homes for gas, water, electric, or solar, because if it's a smart meter or a digital meter, it's pulsing this radiation all the time. And we're not saying no technology. We're not saying don't upgrade the infrastructure. We're saying it, do it thoughtfully and safely, just hardwire whatever it is that you need to do. So we had scientists send in testimony, we had doctors, we had engineers, we had remediation specialists, we had advocates, we even had legislators. And then the day that we had our hearing, literally 1 hour before we got started, I got a release telling us that the largest water utility in the United States is in Maryland County, and they indefinitely deferred their smart meter project. And that's in great thanks to Theodore Scarrato of the Environmental Health Trust and Dr. Ronald, oh, I'm losing his last name, sorry, Ron. But anyway, they worked really hard. So you can fix this. You can make inroads. It's definitely a marathon and not a sprint, but there's so much that we can use here, and legal actions. So just as we were looking at some of this last month, we find out that in Pennsylvania, the courts are siding with the public and they're rejecting that they can force these toxic meters onto your home. In France, a court ruled against the industry because of the health considerations. And now the FCC is being sued. The city of Boston has sued, along with many other cities around the United States. And when the FCC had their chance to get this right, and they failed to do so, once that was formally registered in our federal government's registry, then it had opened it up. And now the Environmental Health Trust and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Children's Health Defense are both suing the FCC. And their initial hearing is going to come up in the end of January. And then this Irregulators versus FCC, this lawsuit's already been resolved. And apparently we paid for years on our phone bills to have safe hardwired technology brought to our homes, like right up to the building. And instead, the industry took that money and put it in their wireless bucket and started putting up all this toxic wireless infrastructure. So now through this Irregulators lawsuit, I understand that our towns, at least here, and I'm not sure how it is in South Africa, but it gives us a leg to stand on to go back and recoup that money and do the right thing and bring safe hardwired technology to the premises. And then here in Massachusetts, for the first time in our courts at the federal level, they recognized that there are biological effects and you don't even have to have heat to hurt your body. So our government guidelines are saying, oh, how much heat does it take from one antenna to raise the temperature of the skin? Well, it has very little to do with raising the temperature. There's a lot of harm happening without any heat. So this was a breakthrough lawsuit here. And there are lawsuits happening all over Europe and elsewhere too. But one of the things that's our brightest light today is that we helped to educate a legislator in New Hampshire, which is the state right above where I am in Massachusetts. And then that legislator and his constituent got in his car, drove down to Massachusetts. We sat at my kitchen table for the afternoon, and we helped him to connect the dots further. And then he went back and he beefed up this bill that he had written to ask very direct questions. And why has the insurance industry put exclusions in their policies? Why do Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, and others already recognize this as a leading risk and they don't offer insurance coverage for it? So that leaves our towns, when we allow this toxic technology in a very vulnerable position, unless in the applications, we have something in there that says, you industry assume liability for this, not us. So we really need to work with our towns to protect our communities. And then as we discuss, why does the legal fine print say to keep this off the body? Why are thousands of peer-reviewed studies ignored by the FCC? Why are they allowing 100 times more radiation to the public than certain other countries? And why isn't anybody looking at the total cumulative effect? Like with any toxin, the more exposure we have, the less our immune system can fight it and other important modalities in our own bodies. So this was groundbreaking. In 7 months, we testified, we got this bill passed into law, and it formed a commission that by law had to investigate the health and environmental impacts of wireless radiation, and now especially 5G. And on November 1st, they published their final report, and they're calling out the industry, they're calling out the conflicts of interest. They're saying we've got to get our federal legislators to fix this in the law. And in the meantime, here's a bunch of recommendations that we can all start thinking about doing right now. Start protecting our children, start migrating from hardwired technology or from wireless technology in our schools and libraries to safe hardwired technology. So there's a lot of really good recommendations in there. And then coming up in January, the state of Oregon, the citizens brought this to a retired public health nurse who's now a senator there. It didn't take her long to look at the science and go, oh my gosh, They got an emergency law passed in less than a year in Oregon. And even during the pandemic, you know, even during all these horrible things that have been happening with racial, you know, injustices, and Oregon was a hot spot for that as well, they still kept it as a priority, and they've been investigating the non-industry funded peer-reviewed scientific literature through their Department of Public Health, or the Oregon Public Health Authority. And in the first week of January, they're going to come out with their report. And I don't know which way that report's going to go, but we're hoping it'll be akin to the New Hampshire report. Vermont has done similar investigations. Other states are tuning into both the radiation and what excessive screen time is doing to us and our children. You know, the radiation's bad enough, but now that we've got people homebound, they're spending so much time on these devices, and it's not healthy. We need to be outside. We need to be out in nature. We need to be developing our own creativity instead of just sitting there in the shallows of a screen. On the international level, New Hampshire, just last week, Monday, the European Parliament began to investigate the wireless radiation issue. And at the end of their 2-hour forum with experts, the moderator recommended that we use that New Hampshire Commission procedure and their report as a great roadmap for the European Parliament to emulate. So we're going to keep an eye on that and see where that goes. The Environmental Health Trust, which was founded by Dr. Deborah Davis, she's a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change. And when she figured out what the wireless issue is, she has just been all over it now for, you know, more than a decade. And her team there has built this incredible database to show what other countries are doing. Who would know? Because we don't get it in mainstream media, but a wealth of information, and deep gratitude to our friends there. And now, because the science has gotten so strong, even the World Health Organization has reopened their investigation, because in 2011, they took a look at radio frequency and they had enough evidence to classify it as a group 2B possible human carcinogen. What was missing were the animal studies. And now that we've got the animal studies done, we need to reclassify that as a group 1 human carcinogen. So in our schools, I wanted to give you guys some resources to look at. We know that Silicon Valley is one of the world's top places for where this technology stems from. But let's take a look at what their children are doing. New York Times did a series of articles that showed that Silicon Valley executives are sending their children to schools with no technology, Waldorf schools, Montessori schools, and others who believe that a child does not need to be in front of a screen to develop properly. They need to be out in their natural environment. They need to be inspired by thoughtful, thought-provoking teachers and their peers. And so Silicon Valley execs are sending their kids to schools where there is no technology, and they're going so far as to having their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. And yet they continue to peddle this toxic technology to ours. So we pulled together an expert panel, and this link goes to videos where you will hear from the scientist who does the senior toxicologist who designed that National Toxicology Program study, and he'll tell you exactly why we should no longer trust anything that's wireless. We'll hear from Dr. Martha Herbert, who founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital, because she sees huge correlations in the families in her care and what we know happens with wireless radiation. We also had Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. When he retired, he knew enough never to have wireless in his home, but he didn't really understand what that meant. So he went out and sought a dozen of the world's leading experts and came back and said, yeah, we are not protected here in North America. So he founded Canadians for Safe Technology, and he's up in Canada trying to do what we're trying to do here, which is get to safe technology. So all these expert talks are available. Just know, because when you open this conversation, you want to have the facts. And if you go into the video description on my YouTube channel, you'll find the actual slides to share with your schools so they can drill down too. Theodore Scarrato from the Environmental Health Trust worked really hard with the state of Maryland, and they became the first public health agency in the United States to recommend that we hardwire our schools. And there's something called the U.S. Collaborative for High Performance Schools, and they have a rating system so you can attain points and get a rating as a high performance school that has a safe, green environment. They've already come up, thanks to Dr. Tony Stein, they've already come up with a module on low EMF best practices. So all these resources are there. When we all became homebound and our children were given these tablets to study from home, some of the Russian scientists work with the Russian health authorities. And I know here in the United States, the Russian scientists have been trying to tell us for years this was a really bad idea to bring this warfare technology of radiation into the public sector, but we didn't listen. And so we're very grateful that the Russian health authority put out these safety recommendations to teach us to use hardwiring as a first option. And then they have, by children's age, how much screen time is appropriate and how to set it up ergonomically so that you're not straining the eyes, so that you've got proper lighting. And we should all be taking a look at that if our children are studying from home. And then on this journey, I've had the privilege of connecting with others, and we founded this little nonprofit out of Europe called Wireless Education, where we've distilled this whole issue down to a little course that anybody can take online in about a half an hour that'll teach you the science and the risks and what other countries are doing and medically recommended best practices. So we literally have off-the-shelf training already ready for schools, for workplaces, and we hope people will take advantage of that. So I want to give you a word of caution. Time and again, we have seen this happen. We'll go in and we'll start this conversation. And I was literally in a meeting with a school board, and one of the gentlemen had an iPad with him. And as we were sharing information, he was going out to validate it. So he comes up with the New York Times saying, oh, Wi-Fi is fine. You know, if there's any concern over 5G, that's because the Russians are behind it and they're fear-mongering. And, the New York Times used to be a credible publication. The gentleman who wrote this 5G health hazard that isn't, he's a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, William Broad. So why wouldn't you believe him, right? Well, I reached out to him. I sent him the science, and I got back a short reply, and I said, is this an autoresponder? Is this actually you? And he writes back and says, no, it's actually me. So I know he's at least seen the science. But they actually have a 5G lab, a Verizon 5G lab at the New York Times. And they've had people from the industry on their board. So these conflicts of industry run deep. And in Ireland, the New York Times was called out for the violation of truth and accuracy code. So just because some popular mainstream something or other says it's fine, you need to dig deeper and get to the non-industry funded peer-reviewed science for the truth. And here in my own town, people who are in leadership positions said, well, the World Health Organization says it's fine, so it must be fine. But who would know that there's 2 groups at the World Health Organization that are addressing EMFs? One is heavily industry influenced, and the other is actually science-based. So I mentioned earlier that the WHO has actually opened up an investigation, but who's it going to be stacked with? Real scientists or industry scientists? So we can't wait for public policy to catch up. We need to really start looking at this and taking measures. So our goals are to differentiate industry priorities from what is in the best interest of the public. And this book over here on the right, called Reinventing Wires, The Future of Landlines and Networks, we're not saying no technology. We know how to get safe technology, but it's not any more wireless. It's using the fiber optics or high-speed cable or copper right to the premises, and then you just pick up inside with Ethernet cables. It's not rocket science. And the beauty is, Not only are Ethernet cables safer once you turn off all your antennas, you get a much faster connection. You get a much more reliable signal. You're using far less electricity, and it's much more sustainable. When we have natural disasters like fires, high winds, all this above ground equipment gets taken out. When you've done safe technology, you actually do much better. So we have the roadmap, so we need to make our towns aware of that, and then we need to measure. And a lot of the industry representatives will measure and say, oh, it's within the FCC guidelines, it's well within ICNIRP guidelines, but they're not measuring for biological effects. So when we take measurements, we need to look at something like the Building Biology Institute or the Bioinitiative report and say, what does this mean at the biological level? And so that's what we did for bishops. We culled out the science to show them that even though the radiation exposure in your school is technically within government guidelines, it's harming our children. So you have to look at the scientific studies showing the biological harm. And that's what those color charts on the right do. They've done a key at the bottom to show neurological damage, cancers, infertility, and far too much more. So we have something here in the United States and in Europe called ALARA, and that stands for as low as reasonably achievable. And this is a principle that has been applied to ionizing radiation, and that's at the higher levels. You know, if we go to the dentist or the doctor, we put on a lead apron to protect ourselves from ionizing radiation. We protect ourselves from the sun. We would never just stay out in the sun for 24 hours a day. So we have this principle to protect us from that kind of radiation. And now we're at the point in time where we need to adapt that to also include the non-ionizing wireless radiation. So that should be our goals and where we're headed. So what can you do? I know, and I apologize, I know this is like drinking water out of a fire hose as we start learning about this, but what might you do today? Take a look at what you're doing right now and then do your gap analysis and turn everything off when you're not using it instead of just the default of everything on all the time. Or keep your device in airplane mode or flight mode, and you choose which antennas you want to turn on. Which one are you actually using? Are you using the cellular? Are you using the data? Are you using the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth, the hotspot, the locator? Only turn it on as you need it, right? And then we have to think about secondhand radiation, because just like with tobacco, we wouldn't even know that we're exposing our children or other people next to us who might have a compromised health situation, or our pets. You know, how many people are locking their cats and dogs and birds and bunnies in a room where the router is, or in the room right above where the router is, or right below it? Or so we just need to expand our awareness to everybody around us as we choose to turn on radio frequency radiation. So the good news is it's not that hard. It's not rocket science. Wherever your technology comes into your building, you probably have a cable that's leading up to your home, and then inside that's hooked up to a router. On the back of the router, there are ports where you can just plug in Ethernet cables, right? The Ethernet cables. You want to look for something that says shielded. That just means it has a layer of foil lining it, and that keeps the dirty electricity that's generated from spilling out into the room like 6 to 8 feet. That's another form of dirty electricity or dirty electromagnetic fields. So look for shielded Ethernet cables. And then, who knew? You can get like a little switch. Think of it as an extension cord for wireless technology where you can plug in as many additional devices as you want, and then just get little adapters. Because like my daughter uses a MacBook, and who knew? You can buy this little Thunderbolt adapter to hardwire her MacBook. You can get a Lightning adapter to hardwire her iPhone. And then you just plug it in and you go into the settings and just turn off all the antennas. So when I brought this home to my daughter, you know, the poor kid, she had to be my kid, right? You know, when you're 15, you just want to be just like your friends and you don't want to be singled out. And So she gets me for a mom, and I'm figuring all this out, and I come home and I have the adapter and I say, okay, sweetie, plug this in and let's see what it does. And, you know, she's rolling her eyes at me. I say, come on, just do it. So she plugs it in, she goes into the settings, she turns off all the antennas, and I said, okay, do something, see if it works. And she goes, oh my gosh, Mom, it's so much faster. And I went, yeah. And, you know, my mom brain, I'm in there going, yeah, and it's more reliable and you're much safer and it's not using energy like, so many reasons, but it's so much better technology when you hardwire. So this is what it looks like, right? Here's your router with the jacks in the back. You just plug in a big Ethernet cable and run that over to wherever you use most of your technology. And then if you have multiple devices, just get the Ethernet switch, and then you can get shorter cables and adapters to go right into your devices, turn off the antennas. And here in my home, you know, I still choose to use my landline, right? So, and it doesn't break the bank for most of us. It's not cost prohibitive, but who would know, right? So all you need is a little bit of courage to do your research first and then figure it out. Having a meter on hand is important because with the Internet of Things, they want to put a tracker in everything that you buy so they can harvest your data and sell that for profit. So like when we bought our latest TV, my poor husband, we had an armoire that he wanted to fit it in just so he did all this research and found one that fit exactly. And I come home and see the box leaning against the wall, and I said, I see that has a wireless logo on it. Can we turn the wireless off? And on that model, we couldn't. So he dismounted it, put it back in the box. We go back to the store. I bring my radiation detection meter so I can measure and make sure that what I bring into my home, I have full control over. So having a meter helps. This one is a pretty good mid-range. You know, there's top of the line professional equipment that goes into the thousands. There are others like this little one on the right that you can get for about $200. I paid about $400 for mine. This is another one. It's a more current one, the Safe and Sound Pro 2, that just has more up-to-date technology in it, but that's about the $400 range too. So I went after a grant at my local library, and I got one put on loan so anybody in my community can take it out and learn what their radiation exposures are. So that might be a project you could do in your own community, is have a tool there that others can borrow. For some people, it's not a big deal. They'll go dig out those Ethernet cables from somewhere in their basement where they stored them when they, you know, went into wireless. For others, it's terrifying. They're completely overwhelmed and don't know what to do, and they're paralyzed. So please know there are professionals out there who are certified, who've been trained in this, and day in and day out, they go into people's homes and they help make it right. So there are building biology experts that do mold remediation, air quality, and the wireless radiation. And then there are also EMF experts who focus just on the radiation and the dirty electricity. So you don't have to go it alone, just know that it's out there. And then when I first found out about this, one of the major gaps we had is that people were getting very sick and they were getting very misdiagnosed. Our doctors had never been trained on this. Our nurses, our firefighters, our first responders didn't know to look for these symptoms and then simply tell people to remove the exposures or help them get back and rebuild their systems from the damages that have happened. Now we are so fortunate. We have a medical conference coming up at the end of January, international. We have speakers coming in from all over the world for this virtual conference. And because it is now online, many, many, many more people can be trained. And for those who are interested, the public is welcome to attend as well. There's a reduced rate for those who don't need to get the continuing education credits. And Dr. Cindy Russell and others have formed Physicians for Safe Technology. So this is a very credible site to send your healthcare teams to when you open this conversation. For engineers and physicists, this is a hard conversation because they've only been told you have to have heat to have harm. So they've been designing products that are very harmful. So there's a lot of information to help them get through the learning curve on this. This paper was with Frank Clegg and other scientists to teach us how to have safe technology in our buildings. Even the IEEE, which is the International Electronic and Electrical Engineers Society. They're already recognizing that we need to fix this. And then there's this plethora of resources, the courses I mentioned, the film Generation Zapped that both Dr. George Carlo, who joined us today, and Professor Ole Johansson, who's one of the world's leading scientists as well, they've joined us today. And their work is featured in this award-winning film, Generation Zapped. In 74 minutes, you can get a really good handle on this issue. Public broadcasting station here, there's a gentleman, Bert Wolf, who does an international travel show. He did 2 episodes on this, which was really great. And thank you to Camilla Reese for her work on that project. And then this group 5gcrisis.com has a toolkit that you can go to and just pull down flyers and letters to the editor to start raising this issue in your community. So with all that said, we'd like to open it up for question and answer. If anybody wants to find me, you can find me through any of these links, Massachusetts for Safe Technology, or that's the email address for that group. You can go out to wirelesseducation.org. You can go to the EMF Medical Conference. And again, there's so much information, but coming and listening to one of these talks, at least now you know, you're halfway there. All you need to do now is figure out how to get to safe technology. So I'm going to stop the screen share. And Carla, if you want to, we'll go into gallery mode here. Carla, if you have seen questions in the chat, that
I've got a question. Thank you, Cece. That was really amazing. Thank you so much. I've got a question from Daniel Sidler. I know he's from Cape Town, and I know he's actually an excellent pediatric surgeon. He wants to know, what about the contamination from neighbors, cell towers, etc.?
Yeah, it's very challenging to get ahead of it. You can take control of your own environment, but it is very challenging, say, if a neighbor has a smart meter that's pointed in your direction. Mostly it comes down to education. Go out and talk to friends and neighbors. Do it as calmly as we can, because inside me, there's a little woman freaking out going, we have to fix this. We are really damaging people here. But if you come out with that kind of a message, it becomes very difficult for people to listen, because the amygdala will go into fight, flight, or freeze, and then they can't process your information. So start these conversations as gently and as compassionately as you can, and maybe they will agree to shield their smart meter or ask for a meter that doesn't emit the radiation. But as far as the cell towers go, there are shielding products that you can integrate into your living space. There are fabrics that are like silver impregnated with fibers that will block the radiation from coming in. So creating a sleep sanctuary is perhaps your best first remediation. There are also paints that can be used that you literally paint your walls with. There are films that you can put over windows, but you need to be really careful with that. And I recommend you work with an expert, because who would know that you need to ground those paints? And if somebody else buys that place when you're done with it and they don't know that you've got that shielding in there, they're going to come in with their wireless router, their cell phones, their baby monitor, and now we've put them in a Faraday cage where that radiation is just going to bounce off the walls and double whammy them all over again. So the first best recourse is to remove the exposures, control what you can, and the second is shielding, and the third, sometimes people just move. They try and go somewhere where they can have a safer environment, but because we now have these satellites in the sky, this is becoming more challenging to find a safe area. So that's why it's vitally important that we all teach ourselves, learn about this, go get the professional training, and then use our voices to make the meaningful changes to the public policy that controls why we're being radiated like this. And doctors have a very powerful voice in this. So when you bring a doctor in to educate with you, that carries a lot of weight.
Thank you. Thank you, Cece.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions?
So we have with us Professor Ole Johansson. Professor Johansson, would you be kind enough to unmute your camera and your, there he is. Hi.
I didn't want to disturb your image, you know, so I put myself black.
Oh no, we'd much rather see your wonderful face. So if I could share a story about Professor Johansson's work. So I mentioned that I used to help run our local education foundation, and one of the campaigns that I ran for a number of years was to replace all those old big fat CRT monitors that we had with our earlier computers, because the new LED flat screens were available. And when I did the flyer for our campaign, I showed it to our IT, our technology director at school, and he said, yeah, let's add a line too, that this is much better for the environment and for health. And I had no idea what that meant, right? So we put that on the flyer, we run a campaign, we replaced all of our big fat CRT monitors with the new flat screen LEDs. And come to find out years down the road, after I fell down the rabbit hole, that the scientist who discovered through his laboratory at the Karolinska Institute that these monitors were throwing off a very harmful form of radio frequency or electromagnetic field was none other than our friend Professor Johansson. So it's unbelievable that our scientists and somebody like little me could be sitting here today together with you, but that's how dedicated our scientists are and our public health experts who have figured this out. So Professor Johansson, if you'd like to say a few words, would be honored.
Thank you very much indeed, Cici, and all the members of this meeting today. It's a great honor, of course, to be here. And I listened to your tremendous presentation, and really it's nothing more to be said, but I will share a few kind of stories and ideas that might help on the way. And to the viewers and listeners, it might sound sometimes I'm in a slightly different direction, and maybe I am, but that's from a scientific point of view. I don't need to deal with school boards or headmasters or parents or pupils or anything. I just have to stick to science, which makes my life a lot more easier than to be in the real situation where there are a lot of compromises to be done. But let me start with one of Sweden's absolutely most rich person, owner of a tremendously big brewery. And he was in one television program about philosophical questions and how life forms a meaning for people, etc. And during that, and his name is Spendrup, and the beer is called Spendrup after the family, and they have a lot of money. And then they asked him what was the best to be so enormously rich. And then he quickly took up a cell phone that was on the desk and said, you know, I don't need to use one of these. And the whole of Sweden went silent, I could tell you. They realized this was a social divider. I wasn't surprised because I had lectured to children at a very, very, very posh boarding school in Sweden. Again, the children to the very, very rich people. And I had found out that they were not even allowed to use laptops, tablets, cell phones, and whatnot because of concerns from their parents regarding their health. And ironically enough, at that time, the two sons to Carl Henrik Svanberg, who at that time was not the head of British Petroleum, but of Ericsson Telecommunication, they went to this school. They were not allowed to use the gadgets that their father sold worldwide. And later on, we have heard similar stories, like from Nokia in Finland, from Silicon Valley in the United States, etc. So I see in Sweden that the lower you are on the social ranking scale, the more gadgets you have in school. And I will try now to swap actually to a page I have here and see if I could read from it. Because one should not forget, and let's see here, there it is, that from a pedagogic point of view, these gadgets are not impressive. There is a lot of cognitive impacts and cognitive questions. And for instance, the very big European OECD PISA performance survey in reading and mathematics showed decreasing results in countries that have invested the most in introducing computers and cell phones in school. And OECD even summarized and said that frequent use of computers in school is more likely to be associated with lower results. Again, pointing to that countries such as Uganda, Nigeria, Indonesia, the Solomon Islands, Malaysia, and mainland China, they're doing the right thing when they even ban these gadgets in a teaching situation. And one should remember that multitasking, too many hours in front of a screen, less time for social contacts and physical activities with risk for neck and back aches, overweight, sleep problems, and IT addiction, followed in some countries like Korea by digital dementia, are some other types of known risks and side effects of all these gadgets. And now we are not talking about the actual radiation, but the behavior and performance and addiction using all of these different equipments. And furthermore, one should also remember that, and Cici pointed really very nicely to it, that when you do shieldings of various sorts, it's a very delicate matter actually. And I definitely would ask for support and help by engineers and building biologists, because it is not that easy and you can make mistakes. And also one should remember that a certain technical level that you can measure is definitely not the same as it being safe. And to be really honest, we need to do more research, and I am trying to, and many other scientists are trying to do better and bigger studies, especially regarding children, staff at school, their parents, their home situation, and so forth. And also Cici mentioned, you might even have a dog or a cat back home that also will be impacted by all these electromagnetic fields. And this is really a full-scale experiment, which I pointed out many years ago. And the question is still in the air: what happens actually when we allow ourselves and our children to be whole body irradiated 24/7, wherever they live, wherever they go to school, wherever they play? And we don't have the answer, but as Cici pointed out, there is a huge number of peer-review-based scientific publications pointing to potential and sometimes established health effects as well as biological effects, which many of them are, to say the least, scary. And finally, I would point to that, don't forget that all the big players, of course, the manufacturers of telecom technology, the operators, but also the insurance and reinsurance companies, together with the radiation protection agencies, as well as the World Health Organization, actually, they have all abandoned ship for the insurance companies more than 20 years ago. And maybe that is more telling than any Ole Johansson ever could be. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, thank you so much, Professor Johansson. Yeah, and thank you for the work that you continue to do. I know you sent out a call for people who may be beekeepers, because you're doing a study right now on the bees. So if anybody out there is familiar with beekeepers or keeps bees, why don't you shoot Carla an email and she can put you in touch with Professor Johansson, because he's going to ask people to take some measurements on New Year's Eve. So we could help him with that study if possible.
Thank you.
All right. One of the questions that I see here is on the planetary impact side. And whoops, I just lost my chat. Hang on. But saying that wireless consumes 10 times more energy than hardwired solutions. So what we can do for that is you can go into my research repository called Understanding EMFs. And if you just, do a search on my name and put in Understanding EMFs, I have a page in there on 5G, and you will find that article in there. And when we're done today, I will send my presentation over to Carla because she has all of your email addresses. And if she'd be so kind, she'll send out the PowerPoint slides, and then you could just drill down to any of that information there if you'd like. Okay.
Great.
All
Thank you
right.
so much. Are there any more questions before we close? Doesn't look like it.
Okay.
Just a huge thank you, Professor Ole Johansson. I'm a huge admirer of you. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I'm a huge admirer of all of you, because if you were not around, my life would be without any meaning.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Cici, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Really, really appreciate it.
I just got a head start on most people. So if anything that I'm learning from our real experts can help others, then just, reach out and let us know.
And,
Yes.
and also could I just add, if anyone listening right now comes up with questions tomorrow or in a month's time, please send them to Carla or directly to you and me, and we could try to answer them to the best of our capacity, because you need to kind of melt all the information and think and ponder for some time before you probably get down to the real crucial issues that is for your children, your family, your teachers, your school, etc.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot to absorb. And I tell people, when you first learn about this, you're going to start noticing all around you, all these signals, right? So I just say, freak out for 10 minutes, go scream into a pillow or whatever you do to get your nerves out, and then come back to the table and take baby steps one by one. What can you do? Perhaps even today, take that little course. It can be really hard when you're the one who learns about this, and then you come home and you start suggesting there's going to need to be some changes around here, and everybody's in love with their devices, and you're going to get a lot of pushback. In many cases, some partners or children will say, oh, we want to be safe, and they'll jump right in with you. Others will say, conspiracy theory, right? So I suggest take that little tiny course from Wireless Education. It's only about a half an hour online. It will level set with the facts. It kicks out a tip sheet at the end. You can all sit back down at the kitchen table and say, wow, who knew, right? And then you don't have to be the bad guy to continue to fight this uphill battle. Get others around you educated before you go to authorities. Get your best friends, get the parents of your kids' best friends, get them in the loop on this. Grandparents are great because they often have discretionary time that busy working parents don't always have. So get a group of people informed before you go to the authorities. That was my hard lesson learned here. Get a group of people and then go. Professor.
Yeah, could I just ask, I love what you say, it's so very, very important. And I have a lot of experience from families that afterwards told me, it only took like a week to change to fiber optics and use it. And the teenagers, and they from the beginning said, no, we will never use this, And after like a week, they had forgotten about the wireless world and were on wire instead, and nothing strange with it. And also recently, or sadly, I would say not really recently, it's in March this year, I took a commuter train here in Stockholm. And, since no one knows actually who I am, I always take the opportunity to put a seed into the mental soil. And there was a very posh lady there in her 60s. And I leaned forward and said, hey, do you know that this smartphone you hold in your hand, that the radiation is cancer classified by the World Health Organization in Geneva in Switzerland? And she got so angry with me, and she started to yell and tell me different bad names and say that I should mind my own business. I didn't know a thing what I was talking about and so on. And I said, stop. So, I mean, you have a smartphone. Why don't you Google WHO, brain tumor and cell phone and see what you get? And actually she did. And after 2-3 silent minutes, she slowly looked up at me and said, oh, I'm so sorry. I mean, you are completely right. It's all here. And now I get really upset, she said, not at you, but at our government, parliament, and health authorities. Why haven't they informed me? You know, I'm not only a mother, I'm a grandmother. And 10 days ago, I gave my granddaughter a new smartphone, and now I regret it. So you see, you can always put seeds into people. And then, of course, it's up to them to decide what do they want to do. But to go, for instance, shielded is not a big drama. Nothing really happens. You get the same information, the same emails, the same videos. Everything is, of course, the same. The information content is still there. And if you need it for some school issues, it's the same, but it's a shielded wired connection instead. And as you said, we have to try to go as low as possible. And the last 5 years when I give lectures, mostly then in public in reality, but due to Corona now, mostly over Skype or Zoom, the word has entered the audiences, namely solutions. What can we actually do? And you have covered it so nicely. And I could just mention that in a few months, there will be a launch of a low SAR, low radiation cell phone from a company in Poland called Modita, and the phone is called Modita Pure. It doesn't maybe solve everything, but it's a step in the right direction. And you have already cars in Japan where you by a simple switch can switch off the interior Wi-Fi because Japanese men and women are very concerned about their health. So they don't want to be irradiated when they go in their car. And also here in Sweden, we have a fantastic company, a small company, I should say, called RP, which stands for Radiation Protection, RP of Sweden. And they have cases for baby alarms, Wi-Fi routers, tablets, laptops, and above all for smartphones. And these cases will reduce the radiation that impacts your body in the order of 70 to 90%. Some models even 99% reduction without impairing the battery lifetime or the connectivity. I say again, it may not solve everything, but it's the right type of motions to go more and more downwards. And if you combine all of it, then maybe you will reach a good tipping point moving into a healthy sector rather than a very risky sector. And one thing I forgot to say is that the very, very, very common question I get from parents is this safe for my child? And unfortunately, I have to tell them, no, it is not.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, on that note, so I'll give Carla my slides. She's going to send out the video and she's going to send out my slides and contact information. So thank you everybody for joining us today. We hope you'll take this message and spread it far and wide. If there's help that you need, I can be brought in to give talks. But just stay in touch if you'd like, and good luck. And I hope that bishops will take a new strategy and really start protecting the children.
Thank you so much, Cece. And I just want to mention lastly that the last few months, we have totally hardwired our entire home. And we've got a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old. And they actually come to me and they already know they must make sure it's not only hardwired, but they must make sure that all the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi is, turned off or this enabled, and they can feel the difference. And it's amazing. It's so nice to know that you can be totally connected and your health is not being compromised at all. And actually, my husband's an architect, and he's also busy trying to educate clients and advising clients to rather, from the beginning of a building process, hardwire everything, because once your home is already built, it's not as easy to then go from wireless to wired, so so it's a nice feeling to know that you are connected, but in a safe way. So otherwise we wouldn't have been, this wouldn't have been possible. So yeah, safe technology.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you very much to everyone that attended this amazing session with Cici. Thank you so much, Cici, and thank you for your amazing words of advice, Professor Ole, and really appreciate everything. Thank you so much, and have a happy holidays, and
thank you.
Wishing you health and safety to all.
Thank you so much, Carla, for all your hard work.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
So much, everyone. Thank you, Carla, for organizing. That was absolutely incredible. It really was.
Thanks, Katja. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. I'm going to have a glass of wine now.
I'm going to join you in my home through Zoom.
Let's press the stop recording button first.
Okay, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye then. Bye.
Bye.